Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Cannon, and I'm an ethnobotanist with the Wallapai Indian Tribe of Northwestern Arizona. And this afternoon, I'll be sharing about the plants of Snow Canyon State Park and their tribal ethnobotanical uses. So just to help orient you, the Wallapai Indian Reservation is over here in the yellow, and it comprises 1 million acres, and it follows 108 miles of the western stretch of the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River. And then as the crow flies, literally just about 100 miles north is Snow Canyon State Park, just northwest of St. George, Utah. To get there by car, though, you have to travel nearly 300 miles and 4 hours because there's no bridge over this stretch of the Grand Canyon. I first came to the Wallapai Reservation 19 years ago as a wildlife biologist, and I was in charge of helping manage the big game species on the reservation, including doing surveys of the desert bighorn sheep, the elk, and the antelope. And it was through that position that I actually took a greater interest in learning about the plants. And so eventually I was able to get support from the tribe to create an intergenerational ethnobotanical program where we could have elders formally teach the ethnobotanical plant knowledge to the next generation of tribal youth. Our ethnobotany youth program has been active for the last 18 years, and it's been largely successful due to the knowledgeable tribal elders that have shared their vast knowledge with the tribal youth. It's a field trip based program, so we go out harvesting when the plants are in season, we collect the plants, and then we bring them back to the cultural center where they're prepared in a traditional manner. On a personal note, I feel very blessed to be doing the work that I do at Wallapai. As I look back at my own heritage, on both sides of my family, both my mother and father's side, I have relatives that have been deeply involved with plants. And so in this photo in the upper right, these are my German relatives. My grandfather is the little boy in the photo, and they're standing in a greenhouse. This photo was taken in Germany, and they reared plants for a livelihood. And then they immigrated to the United States, where my grandfather grew up to continue on this tradition, and growing plants in his greenhouse was his livelihood. And then on my father's side, I have both Kiowa and Oglala Sioux ancestry. Sioux from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and Kiowa from Oklahoma. And the photo in the lower left is my great grandmother, Spotted Wing. She was a plant medicine person for the Kiowa people. So as I reflect on my own life and the work that I do at Wallapai, um, it's kind of a continuation of what has been in my family lineage. So what is so special about Snow Canyon State Park? Well, it's really situated in a unique bioregion. When you consider the four North American deserts, it's kind of sandwiched between the Mojave Desert and the Great Basin Desert. And also to the east, it's on the edge of the Colorado Plateau. And so when we think of the Mojave Desert, you often think of northwestern Arizona, parts of Nevada, California. But we have this little pocket of Mojave Desert in southwestern Utah, and that's where Snow Canyon State Park is situated. And so here on the map to the right, you can kind of see that in relationship to those other regions. So personally, I don't know about you all, but I love hiking, I love backpacking, I love camping, I love horseback riding, and of course I love botanizing. And Snow Canyon for me meets all of those needs. And so every opportunity I get to go up that way, I love to do so. And so here's some photos of me out with my friend horse camping at Snow Canyon State Park. But every time I go there, I use it as an opportunity to observe the botany and to relish in the glory of the landscape. Because Snow Canyon is located in that little pocket of Utah that actually has Mojave Desert plant species, I want to focus a little bit on the Mojave Desert. And just a few things to consider. The Mojave Desert has the greatest range of elevations. It is the smallest, hottest desert in North America. It's also the driest North American desert, averaging 2 to 5 inches of annual precipitation. It contains some of the very oldest living plants on Earth, as well as a large number of wildflower annuals or spring ephemerals, which can live out their entire life cycle within just a few weeks or a month. As it relates to botany, I also like to think of the landscape and how that influences it. And so some of the prominent features in the Mojave Desert include um, mountain ranges, bajadas, which are erosional features, and open playas. You also have canyons, floodplains, sand dunes, and wetlands, three of which of those features are found within Snow Canyon State Park. Mostly in my presentation, I'll be focusing on the ethnobotanical uses of plants from a Wallapai perspective. Of course, when you consider the Mojave Desert, you have to consider all of the other numerous tribes that are from that region, including the Western Shoshone, the Timbisha, the Southern Paiute, Chimwavy, Kaiwasu, Desert Serrano, Kilauea, Mojave, Halchidoma, and Wallapai. So I've limited my presentation to 7 species: Mescal agave, banana yucca, Utah yucca, desert willow, Engelmann's prickly pear cactus, silver cholla, and cliff rose. And as I'm sure you all are aware, these aren't necessarily rare plants. Some of them may be considered uncommon. But when you consider the ethnobotanical knowledge associated with them, in some respects, there's rarity there. As we continue to move to a more modern and globalized era, a lot of the traditional practitioners of the plant knowledge have fallen to the wayside. And so it's been really important at Wallapai that the work focus on revitalizing the ethnobotanical knowledge as a living practice and a living tradition. And so that means actively going out, collecting the plants, having a relationship with the plants, working with the plants in ways that were used traditionally and also in a contemporary way. And then by doing so, you're able to keep that knowledge resilient. You can write things down in a book and record them for posterity, but if you don't have living practitioners that work with the plants, um, the knowledge becomes decontextualized, um, and it lacks the same meaning. And so being able to work with the plants and having the next generation of Wallapai youth um, really know these and how they're used really means something. So here we have Agave utahensis in all its glory here at Snow Canyon State Park. And so many people know this as the common name Mescal agave or Utah agave. It also has been called a century plant for the misnomer that these plants live 100 years. Of course, they live many decades, and Agave utahensis typically can live about 40 years. So as we all know, agave species are monocarpic, which means they bloom once in their lifetime and then they die in this bittersweet tragedy after they've gone out in a bolt of glory. This photo here, you can see this is sort of the end of the season where it's already blossomed and it's gone to fruit. Also, if you look closely at the photo, you see that this species is also clonal. So it can reproduce both sexually and asexually, which is really important for the plant's life cycle. So the fact that this plant can reproduce through clonal root shoots is really important because when it comes to harvesting for food, you have to harvest the mescal agave before it completely blossoms into a flower. And so what happens at that one moment in the plant's life is it's creating all these sugars at the base of the plant that are getting ready to migrate up the flowering stalk to produce nectar and attract pollinators for the next generation. But you have to harvest it before it fully blooms. Otherwise, the plant dries out and becomes bitter. And so it's just in that narrow window of time when the sugars are being produced at the base of the plant that you can harvest it before it fully blossoms. So this same species that's found at Snow Canyon is also grows on the Wallapai Indian Reservation, Agave utahensis. And so we harvest it usually late March, early April as that flowering stalk begins to emerge. You harvest it right at the base part of the plant. You're really not trying to harvest the root, but you want the basal rosette. And then once you harvest that, then you have to cut off all these green leaves, which otherwise would leave a bitter taste. And it's the inner part, the white part, that ends up being roasted. In the pit roasting process at Wallapai, a barrel cactus is harvested as well. And this is the thorns are shaved off, and it's the inner pulp that's sliced up like bread, and that's placed in the agave roasting pit to help provide moisture for the agave to keep it from drying out. So 4 direction stones are placed in the pit and a heart stone, and then it's lined with juniper wood. It's lit on fire, and you allow the coals to burn down for several hours. And once you get a nice layer of gray coals, then you place the barrel cactus slices on top. And then from there, you place the agave hearts on top of that. And of course, tinfoil was abundantly available in the pre-contact era, right? So you use tinfoil. Just kidding. Okay. In days gone by, people would use an animal hide, or sometimes they would use the leftover leaves, and they'd cover the mezcal so it doesn't get dirty, because it's all going to be buried under earth. And it roasts for 24 hours, and then the following day, you dig it up, and it should be all cooked up. The roasted agave turns golden brown. It has a sweet, rich, smoky flavor. It's high in calcium and zinc. The roasted agave can be preserved by pounding it into these dried cakes similar to a fruit leather, or you can put it in the freezer and access it year-round. Banana yucca or yucca baccata is one of those species that sometimes people confuse with mescal agave. Probably not this group of botanists, you know the difference, but just to share a little bit about the differences, yuccas, they always have a smooth leaf margin, whereas the agaves have a serrated, jagged leaf margin. And the banana yuccas will flower year after year after year. They're not monocarpic like the agave. And of course, the yuccas have a special relationship with their moth pollinator. It's always an exciting time when you see the yucca blossoms because it means that there's a chance that there's going to be yucca fruit. And so, like a lot of desert plants, these species cycle, and so not every year you're really going to have a bumper crop. And so we kind of keep an eye on what's happening with the flower blossoms, and if you see a lot of the blossoms and they get pollinated and the circumstances are good, then you may get a bumper crop of fruit. But oftentimes it'll be 3 or 4 years before this happens. As you can see from these photos, the stars aligned and we got a good year of banana yucca fruit. And so we were out there fighting off the cattle to get to the fruit first. This is a nice photo because you can see what the fruit looks like when it's cut open, and when it's fully mature you get a lot of black seeds, and those can actually be used as jewelry, and so you can drill holes in those and make them into beads. But it's the pulpy part on the outside of the seed that's the edible part that tastes actually very similar to a banana. You can eat the fruit fresh, but it's also really good if you roast it. So here's the kids at the school roasting the banana yucca. So we had to tell the kids to hold hands and look cute because the fire guys were after us. We lit a fire on the school grounds to roast the banana yucca, but we forgot to get our fire permit. And in the modern era, that is a no, no, no. So anyhow, we managed to survive the ordeal, and the fire department is still our friend. Both the agave and yucca species are known for having very fibrous leaves. And so if you boil the leaves and scrape off the pith, you can yield the inner fiber, which can be used for many different purposes. Here you're taking bundles of the fiber and twining them to yield the rope. The yucca and agave fiber can be woven into yucca sandals, into hairbrushes, even into these long nets that were used for harvesting rabbits. And so one way to remember the Wallapai name of the banana yucca, which is called manat, is to realize if you're going to weave one of these 100-foot long nets, it's going to be a lot of monotonous work. The root is full of saponins, and so when you cut it open and apply friction, It lathers up just like soap. Um, there's many different species of narrowleaf yuccas. The one at Snow Canyon is Yucca utahensis. The one we have at Wallapai is Yucca elata. In any case, the leaves of this plant are good for coil weaving. And so this is a Wallapai coil basket, and you can use the yucca leaves for that purpose. Um, and also, the fruit of the narrowleaf yucca is not as desirable as the banana yucca, so this is more utilized for basketry. The desert willow is a beautiful shrub that you find growing along the washes, and the Wallapai uses for making a bow for bow and arrows. And so you harvest it when it's dormant in the fall or the winter time. If you were to harvest it in the spring, there's too much water and it could split as you try and work the material. The kids had a really great time making the bow and arrows. So did I. I made one for my little nephew when he was just a newborn. The Engelmann's prickly pear fruit ripens towards the end of the summertime. You use tongs to harvest the fruit so you don't get the glochids on you, and you use the snakeweed to brush off the spines. We go into the canyons and the foothills and get gallons and gallons of the fruit. We mash and strain the juice for making jelly. Here we're boiling the juice with sugar and pectin to make the jelly. Of course, you have to make prickly pear ice cream and prickly pear yogurt and prickly pear gummy bears. The fruit is high in magnesium, calcium, vitamin C, potassium, and fiber. The inner mucilage of the prickly pear pad can be used to heal sunburns and wounds. At Snow Canyon, you have silver cholla, or Cylindropuntia echinocarpa. At Wallapai, we have the staghorn cholla, or Cylindropuntia acanthocarpa. Both yield an edible bud that can be harvested high in calcium. After the thorns are removed, the fruit can be eaten fresh or boiled. Cliff rose is a shrub that grows on the margin of forests, both at Snow Canyon and Wallapai. The bark can be stripped from the trunk and used for clothing. The bark can also be used as the bedding for a cradle board, or in the lower photo, it can be used as tinder, similar to a match. It has been a great joy to share with you today. As they say at Wallapai, Hankyu.